this is, oh, by the way, we added about 15 or 16 students to the National Cyber League today, the ones that fill out this form. If you still want to get in, you have to send it in, you have to email Liz by tomorrow. Don't bother filling out this form anymore. We went through those people today. Email Liz. We have a couple of extra tickets. We bought a bunch of tickets, and it turned out a couple of students had already bought their own tickets. So we had a couple extras. So we still have a couple more people can still do this, but you have to email her today or tomorrow to get the remaining passes. And then you can compete in the National Cyber League, which is worth extra credit, and it's fun, and it's relatively easy. It's about well, you have to pay a $35 to get in, and we bought a bunch of tickets, so you don't have to pay. And then you can compete, and it's just sort of a CTF, but it's a pretty easy one. It's like at the Security Plus level, as I remember. It might be a little bit harder now. Good. And so we're here in 152, and so today we're going to talk about network evidence. And then I'm going to demonstrate the projects about threat intelligence here, which are all extra credit because these require Linux machine, most of them. And so I've made them extra credit so we can focus on other things. And I mentioned as before, you should be getting your Windows and Linux machines running so you can do Velociraptor. We'll be doing that in a few weeks. And you need to have a Windows and Linux machine for that. All right. So in retrospect, I probably could have made these required, but anyway, I didn't for whatever reason. I'll stick with it now. So let's take a look at the slides, which are down here someplace. There they are. All right. There, that's about right. Okay, so monitoring your network is really important. This way you can get evidence that will help you find things. In a lot of cases, you can see suspicious network traffic. It helps you find infected machines and so on. It helps you easily verify the scope of a compromise, looking at network indicators. And you get a timeline. Anyway, it helps you. Network evidence is very useful. It's not, you don't have to go hunting on every machine. Looking on the network is one place you can see the effect of an attack on a lot of computers all at once. So there's 4 types of network monitoring. You can have intrusion detection systems that look for suspicious events in a list of known bad events and then trigger an alert. That's like what antivirus does. Then there's packet captures where you record all the network traffic completely so you can reconstruct all the transferred files and everything, which is very thorough, but it's very expensive. You have to have a really powerful system and you have to have a lot of storage. Session information is simpler, where you just record a summary, like what IP connected to what IP, on what port number, how many total bytes transmitted, some general information like that. And high-level statistics are also available, just some kind of summary of what kind of data, network traffic you're seeing. Those are the types. So event-based alerts are probably the most common in the world of security. You run something like Snort or Suricata or any of these other IDSs, and they have a rule set of suspicious traffic, and whenever the traffic matches the rule set, they raise an alert. They say DDoS attack in progress, DNS exfiltration in progress, or what else. The full packet captures, I mentioned, this is like what you get from Wireshark, although you would not use Wireshark for this because it's not secure enough. But you just capture all the data and save it, and then of course you have total data of everything. You have a huge file that's hard to hunt through. It's not that different than like a whole hard disk image. You've got everything, but you've got so much, it's now hard to wade through it and find things. But when you do it, everything you need is in there, all the interactive. Now the only problem is almost all traffic now is encrypted with HTTPS, so a lot of this network traffic will be useless unless you're also man-in-the-middling HTTPS to decrypt it, which can be done, but that's fairly difficult. So session information is really quite common. You just log the headers, so you have connections and addresses, but you don't have the body of the packet, so you cannot reconstruct the data. But you can see who's been talking to who, and if you have an indicator of compromise, like an IP address or a domain name, you can see which computers have been contacting that domain name, and that's still useful to know. And then high-level statistics list, so the type and number of packets. So you might find abnormally high volumes of traffic, and this is useful for DDoS attacks, for people who start running BitTorrent on your company network and things like that, where they're just creating an abnormal amount of traffic and you want to find out who it is. This is what we have at the college. They have simple monitoring like this, so if some student starts running a big file transfer to download movies on campus, they can detect it and block that. not because we really care about downloading movies, but because in normal times, when the campus has a lot of students, you actually use up all the bandwidth and freeze it up in part of the network that way. So the most common, like I say, is event-based. So you got rules and thresholds. If a certain number of packets are seen within a certain time interval, meeting a certain rule, then you trigger it. And so you typically snort and suricata are the main tools here. So you have signatures, and you can just have an IP address and a port. That's easy, very easy. It does not slow down the sensor very much. If you have a complex indicator with like a regular expression, looking for a, oh dear, I got to answer this text message. No. All right, I hope that works out. There's a problem back at my house, but I'm not there. Okay, I think she's going to get somebody else. All right, good. Anyway, all right. Anyway, so you can make it very complicated. You can have complicated regular expressions that look for a complicated pattern of bytes, and that can really slow down the sensor. And then what will happen is it can't keep up with the traffic. It'll spend so long processing a few packets, it'll miss a bunch of packets. So that's a thing to be aware of. So it's sort of an art to learn how to write rules that are efficient. And they look like this. This is what snort rules look like, and they are the standard format that you use for this stuff. So this is an external, first you give it the TCP type of traffic. It's going to go in from any external network to any place on the home network on port 22. And so this is going to be SSH traffic coming in, and it's going to call it a brute force login if it has 5 events within 60 seconds. So I'm not quite sure I see where it's going to tell me that it was a login attempt, but I'm not good enough at reading these. But anyway, I can see 5 of them in 60 seconds. I think 5 in login failures is what it is, although I don't quite see what part of this determined it was failure. Anyway, that's what the rule looks like, and it is really a pain to write them. There are tools to help you write it. So you can put that in a snort configuration file, and that'll put the alerts, it'll put them in this thing called alerts fast and alerts.txt. All right, here's another rule to detect a fake SSL certificate. This was APT1 used this fake SSL certificate in 2003, and this whole complicated rule would detect that. So it's looking for particular content like mail.aol.com and this particular pattern of bytes and this particular pattern of bytes that looks like perhaps a signature of the certificate. So, and then it's got a reference pointing you to a web page about it, Trojan activity, and here's the things to record about it. So you see, it's really only looking for a certain pattern of bytes, which is not too expensive. Looking for these bytes and those bytes and this JOC at AOL.com. So that's not too bad. Serial number, yeah, serial number and the issuer string. So anyway, that's another example of a snort rule. All right, so your header and full packet logging. This way you'll have a lot of information to reconstruct network traffic. And if you're doing full packets, you'll have the kind of complete data that you could use to take to court, real complete evidence. You could take any of it to court, but the full packets would be best. Then you have the whole story. And if that's true, then your packet capture should be treated as evidence. You should add an MD5 hash to it or some other hash and create a chain of custody. So you can say this is, if you think you're going to have to take it to court. So the IDS can retain the full session sometimes, but usually they don't. And if you actually want to do targeted collections, then you should use tcpdump or Wireshark. Let me just check here to see if anything else is happening at home. Okay, great. Okay. All right. Good. Okay. Well, that seems to be resolved. Okay, good. Anyway, pardon me. All right. So tcpdump is the main thing you'd use to monitor a network if you're going to use ordinary machines and software instead of specific hardware build devices. And so if you do tcpdump by default, it will only capture the first 64 bytes of each packet, which is enough to get the header information with the addresses and port numbers, but you don't get the full packets. And they call this trap and trace, and this is the kind of stuff you'll see. This is get HTTP host and so on. You can also do complete packet captures if you want to. This is a complete packet capture of an HTTP request. And you can, it's a very good tool, tcpdump, you use for this. Now for statistical monitoring, the standard is NetFlow. You buy these NetFlow devices from Cisco, you put them on your network, and they give you a summary of all the traffic. So they inspect the traffic, and they create a nice NetFlow summary. Addresses and ports, how many packets and how many bytes. So you just have general information, how much flow is going in what direction. That's the standard. You can also buy commercial products that will monitor the network and give you a graphical display. All right, there's FlowTool and Argus. These are included, I think, in Security Onion. I've used them there. I didn't love them too much, but they're there. You have to convert packet captures to Argus format, and then you can create graphs. Now, when I used it, it was extremely primitive, making these graphs in some obsolete stuff like Flash, and it didn't work very well, but it may have been updated now. People tell me Security Onion has gotten a lot better than when I used it maybe 5 or 6 years ago, but it gives you these graphs of how many bits per second over HTTP, so there's clearly not much traffic normally, and at this point there was a whole lot of HTTP traffic, so something happened there, and you might want to investigate that. And here you've got a log scale, so this peak is really much higher than you think it is. It's really about 100 times bigger than this peak. So again, something strange happened here, like a DDoS attack or a huge download or something. So let's take a look at a Kahoot. I've got them down here. This is 9A. All right. Hey, there we go. Yep. Spooky Halloween stuff. I like it. They got a pretty good violin sound. All right. I think we've got enough people. Let's give it a try. All right, so what monitoring gives you the ability to reconstruct files? Yep, you need full packets for that. All right. What does NetFlow do? Yep, that's high-level statistics. All right. What does Snort do? The Snort is event-based. It looks for signatures and triggers an alert if it finds those signatures. All right, what does tcpdump do? You can do full packet capture with it. You can also do header capture, but the only option that works on this list is full packets. All right. right, that's faces. Doesn't seem to care about getting points. And Hina, that's a real person. Okay. All right, good. Okay. Let's go back to here. Okay, so. All right, so when you set this up, your simplest method is to get a 1-unit server with a hardware network tap. This is what you usually do. You could use a laptop. You get a network tap. Either a special device you just add to the system is the best way, or you can get a monitor port on a switch where it has a certain number of ports, and the monitor port sends an extra copy of every packet out there. I always have kind of a logical flaw with this. You can get a switch with like 16 ports, and then a monitor port that's supposed to give you the traffic from all of those 16 ports. So obviously, if all those 16 ports were going at top speed, your monitor port would not be able to keep up. And this is one of the dirty tricks I heard from a worker at Cloudflare. Most switches are not actually able to handle all the ports running at full speed. They have a protocol, but they can't really handle all that traffic. And they really wanted that at Cloudflare, so they actually had to build their own switches. Anyway, so you can do this. Now you can also just use Snort and tcpdump to run on a laptop. That's a sort of way to put it together quickly for a quick, but if you're going to set up a permanent setup, then you just get specialized servers for this purpose and add them to your server rack. So your intrusion detection system cannot normally do network surveillance and intrusion detection at the same time, because if it has to capture full content, that will use up all its CPU, and it won't be able to also look for alerts. So you normally do one or the other, have two separate systems if you want this. One to capture all the packets without trying to analyze them, and another to analyze the packets and trigger alerts. Those are two separate jobs and really should be two separate devices. So you've got to define your goals, make sure you have the legal right to monitor the activity, which is usually not a problem if you're at a company, but it might be under some circumstances, like if two companies are sharing the same network. Get the hardware and software, then you have to secure it, both against electronic attacks and against physical tampering. This should be in a locked server closet or something. You have to put your monitor somewhere where it will catch all the traffic, which is a lot harder than you might think. If you put it on the entrance to the internet, then you might, that first thing, do you have only one gateway to the internet? You probably don't at a large company, because if it went down, you'd be out of business. You'd probably have another one you're using too. And also, if you only do that, then you will not get any traffic inside the company, and that might be important. So you might need several monitors at different places. And another big problem, of course, is network address translation. If you get some sensors inside the network and some at the exit, the networks might have been, the IP addresses might have been translated by then, so it'd be hard to correlate them properly. All right, and so you got hardware. Like I say, just getting a normal server is probably your best thing, but you can put it on any machine. Just get Linux or FreeBSD. FreeBSD used to be the standard for routers and firewalls. Linux is now considered better. And there's a different kind of network socket to install for best performance, the NTOP one instead of the AF packet one, which is the default. So if you plan ahead, then you just buy a commercial network monitoring device and use it so you have alerting and storage. All right, and so Cisco has this one, IDPS from Cisco. They have Cisco's next-gen IDPS. And this is a review from a few years ago, actually just last year, and the runner-up was Trend Micro. So these are a couple of commercial products that are highly rated. And I mentioned Security Onion. Security Onion is a special distribution just for network monitoring. So you install it, and it has a whole bunch of analysis tools and network monitoring tools. And like I say, it used to be really primitive. I tried to teach it in the network monitoring class, and it was miserable. But people tell me it's gotten a lot better. It has an active community. They're on Twitter. They have a conference. They keep developing it. So it's probably getting pretty good by now. All right, so considering where to put it, you try to figure out where the data leaves your network. If there are choke points available between the boundaries, like if you have a high security region like your payroll, and then a low security region like your web servers, they're just one way to get from one to the other that you can make sure all the traffic is passing through. And a lot of things can confuse it. Like you might have tunneling or VLANs, which can confuse your interpretation of the packets. And like I mentioned before, network address translation and proxies will also make it hard to understand how the packets caught on one side of that device correlate with the packets on the other side of that device. And when you're changing things on your network, you might be able to make it easier to monitor if you can switch to make all the traffic go through a single internet connection instead of a separate ISP for each office. That might help. So how do you get trained on how to use the tools? Most of the jobs expect such experience. Well, it's a good question. You're not going to get much of this training from us because the only things we can teach you on is free stuff. Most of these tools are commercial. Typically, you get trained by the vendors. Yeah, we have a firewalls class, but it doesn't have hands-on right now. This is a tough one. We really should have a Palo Alto certification class. I've been agitating for this for years. It would be great if we had that. We do have the Cisco classes, though. The Cisco classes will train you to run the Cisco equipment, and that's good. That's probably the best thing we have here. But other than that, there are special classes in each of these vendors' products, and they're very valuable. We'll also teach you Splunk here. I'm teaching it in quite a few of my classes. So we do cover some of the major tools, but there's so many of them, we can't cover them all. I wish we had a Palo Alto firewall hands-on class. That would be great. I've been trying to get that for years. Just talked to a counselor and 122 was offered. Yeah, well, the problem with 122 is there's no hands-on, the current way it's offered. So I would recommend taking another one if you want hands-on. It's a problem. In my opinion, 122 should be a Palo Alto certification class. And I actually got the Palo Alto software for that reason, but I was not able to persuade people to do it that way yet. There may come a time when it's done that way. But you can, by the way, you can take a Palo Alto certification at other colleges. I think they have it down at Ohlone. You might do that. Well, there are some you can get at a community college, though. Anyway, so like I say, lock up your sensor, make sure it's patched, and Tripwire is a good tool to make sure that the OS has integrity. Tripwire has been around forever. Tripwire calculates an MD5 hash or some other hash of every file and stores it, and it notices if any of the files change. So if any of your system files change, that indicates a rootkit or something, and it's a simple way to make sure that your operating system is not being attacked. So make sure your network monitor is getting the traffic and keeping up with it, and test. You should come up with some tests. Throw in some known bad traffic that will trigger a rule and make sure it triggers it. It is very common that your devices are not actually doing anything and you don't notice. Another common thing, by the way, is that your backup systems are not doing anything and you don't notice. So you have to test these things. Yes, Palo Alto does have a VM appliance, and I have it. I got it from them, so I could use it for training in a contest years ago. So yeah, it's not that hard. Getting the virtual version of the appliance is not the reason why we can't teach it. It's just the teacher would have to get the certification and then teach that material, and we haven't found someone to do it yet. Anyway, all right. So general principles to analyze data once you capture it, Wireshark is really excellent. It's not good for capturing live traffic, both because it'll use up a lot of RAM and freeze after a while, and because it's not very secure. The reason why Wireshark is easy to use is because of the graphical display and the incredibly rich analysis module. It can analyze thousands of different protocols. And the reason is because the community just contributes these Lua modules to analyze the protocols, but that's why it's not safe, because those are all written by amateurs and just thrown in and not tested, so they often have security flaws. So running Wireshark for monitoring live network traffic is a security risk. You shouldn't use it that way. You should analyze saved traffic that you captured with something like tcpdump. And then you can use queries that answer questions in the Wireshark data. Hunt down specific network addresses, specific types of data, and so on. There's also other products like NetWitness Investigator. This will sort all the traffic by protocol and then let you choose the type of protocol. So it shows you the IP addresses. You can click on one and see just the traffic for that IP address, or the host name, or the type like DNS, HTTP, NetBIOS, and so on. So it's just a way to easily sort data into different categories. In my opinion, Zeek is probably a more modern way to do this than NetWitness Investigator. And we'll use Zeek in this class. All right, and then you can get logs. All your devices make logs. Routers, firewalls, IDS sensors, and everything should make logs. Your DHCP servers and your firewalls, you should turn on these logs if you don't have them, and then gather them all at one central place, like a Splunk server, so you can use them. So your IDS sensors might get part of the attack. Your host-based sensors might detect the part of the attack that hits them. They'll notice the alteration of system files, and then log files from the domain controller may show a failed authentication. And this is why you need a central thing like Splunk, so you can take these events that happen on different devices and easily examine them all in one central location to reconstruct what happened during an attack. So server-based logs are files on the individual systems, so you should forward them to a central receiver. It's not easy to erase, and one that's secured. That's the way to do it. And log aggregation is what I was talking about. This is what we've been using Splunk, and it's really quite a job. The logs are all on different devices. They're in different formats. So the way Splunk works is there's a separate agent for every device, and the agent forwards it, and then you have an interpreting module at Splunk to take it apart and find the IP address and the server name and other fields. And so you have to have special modules to handle it at both ends. And we've seen how Splunk does that, and all the other central log monitoring systems have to do the same thing. Check, okay, nothing important. All right. And one, by the way, an issue I probably mentioned before is that you might have a problem with timestamps. One thing is time zones, but another one is not all your devices have the clock up to date. Some of them might be off by 5 or 10 minutes, and that's really bad. So it's a good idea to use network time protocol and synchronize the time on every device as much as possible so you can correlate your logs. If the times are wrong, that just makes your life even harder than it has to be. All right. Let's try another one of these. Wonder whether they're monitoring cellular. I don't think anybody can monitor cellular traffic. I've never heard of that. I think it would be highly illegal, for one thing, to wiretap phone calls. Also quite difficult to do. Maybe the government is monitoring cellular traffic, but I don't think so. With the wiretap order they are. The police will monitor it with specific wiretap orders, and they even have these Stingray devices they drive to man in the middle of the wire. But it can be done, but the main way to do this is technical with a Stingray. You put up a fake access point, and your phones connect to that. That's what the police are doing. But nobody but the police can do it legally, and the punishment is extremely severe. Wiretap laws have been around for a long time, and the punishment is real strong. So I don't think anybody does that. Yes, and that's what the student was saying. Came across activists that said that 70% of our security budget goes to private companies, and those people totally do. That's what the government's mission. They have a court order or something, supposedly, or a national security interest in the NSA. They totally do monitor network traffic for things like that, telephone traffic, yeah. Those are the people that do it. And also nations that buy the monitoring software from like Israel, like Saudi Arabia and stuff. They install this software on phones. So it can be done. And that's the easiest way to do it, by the way, put an app on your phone that steals the traffic. And people do that, although I haven't heard of them getting your voice very much with it, although in principle it would happen. Putting malware in your phone would be a way to do it. Criminals might do it, and governments, but normal companies I think would not do it because it's too illegal. All right, let's try this. All right, which one can do intrusion detection or surveillance, but not both at once? All right, that's an IDS. All right. All right, which tool uses custom Lua decoders? Lua is a programming language. I've never used it. There are so many programming languages. It can drive you nuts. When I started in the 70s, we argued about what would be the one language that would win and all the others would go extinct, and that is not what happened at all. They just proliferated until there's hundreds of them, and it's Wireshark. All right. All right, which item makes sure that your OS files are intact? Tripwire is the open source product. Microsoft is part of Windows that does this too. Config, I forget the name, but there's a command line tool on Windows that supposedly makes sure that your system files are not being altered. All right, so what's a top-rated commercial IDPS, intrusion detection and prevention system? Cisco has a good one. All right. No. That's a two-time error. So I think we will see the name, and I think we know who that is. Oh. So I'll stop this recording.